Hello everyone, we are at the Southland Technology Conference 2013, also known as SOTEC 2013, and I'm sitting here with Alicia McLean. Hello Alicia.
Hi Cornelius, how are you today?
Good afternoon, I'm doing very well, thank you. How's your conference going so far?
It's going very well.
All right.
Yeah, I'm impressed.
And it'll become even better tomorrow when you will be presenting on the topic of agile practices, the key to building high-performing teams. Now, let me try and translate that title here. So you're saying that agile practices are the key to developing high-performing teams. Is that right? Did I understand that correctly?
You know what? People oftentimes ask me this, and what I like to do is when I look at an environment, I like to use the right tool for the environment. So I'll say that it is a way to build high-performing teams, and in my experience, it's been a very effective way to build high-performing teams.
All right. Mm-hmm. In the abstract for your presentation, the first sentence reads, high-performing teams don't happen auto-magically. Now, why is that? Why doesn't it happen auto-magically or automatically?
Well, the reason why I say automatically is because I think people think that they just bring a group of people together and all of a sudden things are going to start to happen because people are working in a group. Well, if you look at the history of teams over the last 30 years, we moved from what was essentially called work groups to now this concept of teams. And in working with teams, there's a lot of interdependencies and people work very differently than they did 30 years ago. So we can't just assume that because we bring a group of people together that everything is just going to happen automatically. We have to lead. We have to create the right structures, make sure that they have the right opportunities and the right events and artifacts and role clarity to make sure that these things happen.
How do you support people in your organization to do that?
The way that I support my teams it really starts with training first. So first, identifying the strategy and the approach that we're going with. And in our case, we're using a variety of agile methods, or agile practices, if you will. So we start with the definition of that. And then we make sure that everyone's trained so that we're all speaking the same language and we're all on the same page. And then in terms of the leaders that report to me, they understand that it takes the discipline to make sure that the activities, events, artifacts, and roles happen or are clarified so that we can be successful.
Do you have support from above?
We do in this instance, but in the last company that I worked for, where I led an implementation of Scrum, we did not have higher level support, so it was grassroots, and it was still effective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You told me before the interview started here that you consider yourself to be an internal consultant.
Yes.
How's that?
Well, I am an employee of CareFusion. I am the manager of project management in our hosted solutions area. And so what I bring to that from a consulting perspective is all of my experience in Agile. So the certifications as a certified Scrum Master, certified product owner, and then having led now 2 organizational enterprise-wide implementations, I bring that background to my role.
All right. How do power tools fit into all of these? And do I need an 8 or a 9 or an 18-volt battery for them?
It's a great question. And let me explain the concept of power tools. Oftentimes, people look at the skills necessary to be effective and work well with others. They oftentimes refer to them as soft skills. And soft skills, if you even mention that in a room of technology people, there's eye rolling, there's sighing, there's this whole idea that soft skills really aren't that important. And so I've reframed those and I call them power tools because it's truly what the leader needs. And if we talk about this idea of emerging leaders in a team, these are the skills that you need to be able to be highly effective at your job. And so I have a list of things here that I've referred to as power tools, and I'll just go through a couple of them here, but the ability to influence without authority. Any project manager that's been around for any amount of time knows that because oftentimes the people that you work with are not direct report to you. Being a great motivator, a diplomatic liaison, adaptive leader, change agent, having passion. You know, there are a lot of things that it builds the package to help people lead, and power tools are defined as those skills that a really solid leader can use to help build a high-performing team.
And you can't learn those by reading a book or going to a classroom, right?
That's a great question. because leadership can be learned, and effective leadership can be learned, and so can these power tools. I think it first takes awareness that these are effective tools to help you build high-performing teams as a leader, and then an understanding and the use of these skills. So you can learn them, you can read them in a book, you can take them in a class, but you have to put it into practice. You have to be willing to try it out and keep trying it out and perfecting it over time.
Mm-hmm. What do the people who report to you tell you about the power tools?
Well, it's interesting. I have this person that reports to me that thinks that some of the things that I do are magic. And I tell her, I'm like, it's not magic. It's years of, work. And I don't mean like decades, but it's deliberate, and it's a deliberate effort and practice to build my skills in this area. And so because my skills have gotten strong in this area, when I do certain things, it could look like magic.
All right. The main part of your presentation tomorrow is going to be about 10 characteristics that help you build and develop these high-performing teams. And we selected 3 of those. Mm-hmm. And we'd like to take a closer look at these 3. And the first one you have selected is a shared purpose and direction. Tell me more about that.
Absolutely. I like to use this little graphic from Alice in Wonderland where she's looking up at the Cheshire Cat in the tree, and she basically says, can't even remember the exact words, but she's basically saying, I don't know where I'd like to help me find where I'm going. And the cat says, well, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So the whole idea of not having a specific and a deliberate vision can have the team being all over the place. So a shared vision is very important. They need to be all sort of rallied around the direction that they're going in. So this is a really important thing. There's also a reference that I really, really like. It's on TED Talks, and it's Starting with Why. And Starting with Why is an excellent quick clip on TED Talks on how to really build context for people around the vision and the direction. And so I would say that there's a couple of Agile drivers that help contribute to building a shared vision and shared direction. For people that are familiar with these terms already, I can go through them, but I can explain them as well. So we've got the iteration and sprint goals, the user stories, and the daily stand-up task board. And so when you think about rallying everybody around a focus and a purpose and a direction, the iteration and sprint goals lead to that, because it's that set of stories, if you will, tasks and activities that need to happen over a time-boxed period of time. Everybody agrees to it. They've already estimated it, and they understand what it's going to take to deliver. They rally around it, and that's their focus for that period of time. They're not all over the place. They know what they're driving to. That's huge. And then, of course, the user story contributes to that, because when you look at a user story, if you're familiar with the concept of a user story, when you look at that, it's very clear what needs to happen to build that feature. Same thing applies for the daily stand-up. Every day in the daily stand-up, we're looking at our task board, and we're focused on what we said we were going to do, which were the sprint goals, and that was our commitment. And that is a very powerful way to build a shared focus and vision for the team.
Right. And it's inherent in the Agile practices. It's not something that you have to teach your team to do. It's something that the team does because we are applying Agile practices, and therefore you're automatically getting the shared purpose and the direction.
That really is it. Once you've taught them the concept of how to put together a sprint goal, once you've taught them the concept of how to effectively write and use a user story, and once they understand the purpose and value of the daily stand-up, these things just happen.
All right. The second characteristic is open communication.
So open communication is, at least from the Scrum practices, and that's what I'm mostly focusing a lot of these drivers on, or Scrum and XP practices, the open communication is huge. I have a lady that just started reporting to me a few months ago, and I said, so tell me, what's different about where you used to work and where you're working today, here in our environment, here in Enterprise Solutions? She says, everything is so transparent here. And I said, so is that a good thing? And she said, no, it's awesome. I'm just amazed at the transparency. And so what we find is that open communication really helps people feel a part of what's happening. They feel they can have trust in the organization and their peers. And they also feel like it's okay to speak up. So these are important factors. Open communication is very important. And so what I would say is that the Agile drivers that really help to contribute to this are the daily stand-up, the team task board, the sprint review, the sprint retrospective, the use of story points for Agile estimation, and Agile tools like TFS, Rally, Jira, other tools like that. These all contribute to just this highly transparent environment. Transparent environments work for some people and they don't work for others. Because if you're trying to hide something, a transparent environment is going to be scary for you. But when you build a culture that centers around this open communication and you do it using these Agile tools, you really create an environment where people they really feel a part of what's happening there. They really do. If I go through these one at a time, I'll just talk in a brief about how they lend themselves to open communication. If you've ever attended a daily stand-up, I like to refer to it as 15 minutes to better communication and collaboration. And so you have a team of people in a room and they're all talking about a single agenda. What did you do since we met last? What will you do before we meet again? And what's blocking your way? Everybody in the room that is invested in that sprint goal is going to talk about what they did. So that's huge for open communication. The task board is right in front of you. If you're doing it old school, you're going to have sticky notes on a whiteboard, or you might have it in TFS and it's an electronic, a task board. Whatever it is, it's visible and it's right there for everybody to see. So the task that has your name on it and your estimation on it is right there for everyone to see. The sprint review, that's the demo. And so that's a very transparent thing. We know what you're working on because we know what the sprint goals are. And when you demonstrate this feature, we know how you put it together. And so it's a huge way to build an open communication with our stakeholder or our product owner to say, this is what we're working on. Are we moving in the right direction? The retrospective, this is one of my favorite activities. This is some people refer to it as an after-action review, a lessons learned activity. The retrospective asks those three questions: what worked, what didn't work, and what do we need to fix, going forward? So the retrospective is another way to build open communication. The estimation using story points. This is a great activity. If you've ever watched a team do planning poker, talk about sharing ideas and helping people understand the gravity or the expanse of the work or how small the work might be. It's a very open conversation. It's not somebody over in their cube estimating the work in a vacuum. It's us together having this conversation. And then, of course, tools. TFS, Rally, Jira. There's a lot of them out there. I just came up with those three that were on the top of my head. But when you use tools like this, now you can go global, right? You're not worried about the task board sitting right in front of a team that's only in Orange County or San Diego. Now we've brought India in. Now we've brought China in. And everybody can see what's on the task board and what's down in the tool. So again, that creates global open communication.
Right. And these three items that you mentioned, I've not used them personally, but they are software tools that help you to implement Agile practices within a global team that is working on your project.
That is correct.
Okay.
TFS is Team Foundation Server too. I'm sorry about the acronym there.
All right. Yeah. And then the next characteristic that we want to talk about is evaluate its own effectiveness.
Yes. So a team that evaluates its own effectiveness is very interested and invested in continuous improvement. And so we already referred to that in the area of open communication. But when we look at that particular activity of the retrospective and the way that I teach it, we don't just go into the room and ask the question, well, gee, what worked, what didn't work, and what do we need to fix? I actually evaluate it by all the functional areas that were touched during the course of an iteration or release. And so we look at every one of those areas and we ask that question, because if I've been on an iteration for 3 weeks or I've been on a release for, say, 90 days, I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday, let alone what happened 90 days ago in the area of quality or the area of dev or the area of project management. So the approach that I teach really helps people explore each area. And when they do that, they're essentially evaluating their effectiveness in that area. And it's not just the function, it's how did this function perform over the course of the release or iteration? And then how did we all work together with that function? So let me see. Let's look at the different areas here. So self-direction, I would say an Agile driver is retrospectives, sprint reviews, test-driven development, and continuous integration.
All right. I understand the retrospectives at the sprint reviews. That evaluates how we were doing. We talked about that also under communication. But TDD?
Yes. I think that test-driven development is a huge way to evaluate your own effectiveness, because as a developer, if I write the test first, I'm already sort of putting the test out in front of my performance on this. And so it really helps clean up an individual's performance when they write that test first. And there's a lot of ways that you can do this, but I'm specifically talking about software development.
Okay. And then continuous integration makes sense as well, because if you continuously integrate the latest 2 lines of code you have written and you run it, you have a continuously integrated system that can be tested and evaluated against what you set out to do.
Absolutely. And you're doing it in short intervals. And so you're constantly getting this feedback along the way. So I think it all fits and it makes sense.
All right. Let's try and help translate what we've heard into action items for our listeners here. But first, when it comes to building high-performing teams, what is the number one thing that people are doing wrong?
Well, this is going to sound kind of crazy, but I think the first thing that if I were a leader and I was on the wrong track to building a high-performing team, I would start off by making assumptions. I think what happens is people get into a team, they look around at what's happening, and they start making assumptions about what's happening instead of actually having the conversation. What I would do personally is I would sit down and get some more feedback from people. I would have one-on-ones with folks to figure out what direction we need to go in. And I would ask myself the question, what problem are we trying to solve here? Because oftentimes, if we don't ask that question, then we'll be all over the place. So that would be a couple of tips that I'd have.
All right. And now, what are you 2 or maybe 3 tips that you have for our listeners? Maybe steps that they can take tomorrow on their own teams, even if they don't really use Agile practices, to begin, the journey towards becoming much more high-performing.
It's interesting, and you don't have to use, when you say Agile practices, anybody can do something like a retrospective. And when you do that activity, you can find out where the issues are. You can have the one-on-ones with people, and that finds out things a little bit more individually. And then you can have a team retrospective, and that really helps you get down to what problems are we trying to solve. And then I would pair that against a list. Like we have 10 practices that we're going to be talking about tomorrow afternoon. You can look at each one of those 10 practices, and after you've done the retrospective, you can kind of see, well, where are the gaps? And where do we need to fill in? And what is the right tool to apply to help us get there? So if I do a retrospective and I see that communication is broken down all over the place, what tool will I use to get our team there to help them be a better team at communicating? That's how I would recommend.
Yeah. Okay. And of course, for those of you out there who do not use Agile practices, just call it a lessons learned. Lessons learned are normally done at the end of the project, so call it a monthly lessons learned. Always on the last Thursday of the month, we do a lessons learned, reviewing the last month. In this way, you can introduce this great idea of doing quicker, faster, regular lessons learned and bring your team more up to becoming high performing.
Absolutely.
Any other steps you'd recommend?
Let's see. We want to first find out where the pain is, and that's through activities like the retrospectives and the one-on-ones. And we also said, look at a list of characteristics for a high-performing team. And then finally, I'd say, and this is going to sound crazy too, but you have to get started. I had a gentleman that used to report to me that said, you know what? You cannot turn a parked car. And I'm like, you're right. You got to turn it on and you got to get moving. So it really is a matter of defining where you want to go and then getting started with it and having the discipline to keep it up.
All right. Wonderful. Alicia, thank you very much for your time and being here today.
Thanks, Cornelius. It was fun.